First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Bradshaw, the Planning Committee, and the National Academy for inviting me to speak. It was truly such an honor to be here, and not just because I got to miss 2 days of school. One thing I just wanted to start out by saying was I wanted to state once again the importance of examining a school's climate and evaluating and changing social norms, because that's something that really resonated with me since the first time I heard it. And I think there's a lot of merit to things like trying to empower a bystander to speak up, or addressing individual instances of bullying and putting in disciplinary action. But ultimately, it rarely affects the underlying problem. And especially in sort of Psych 101, you hear about the bystander effect and how it's sort of a given that in our society, adults will act a certain way when everyone around them is acting that way. And to be that person who stands up and takes a stand takes social capital. And although I think it's great to try to empower students to do that, it also seems a little unfair that we would build an entire system around assuming that an awkward 6th grader is going to feel comfortable standing up to the cool kid and saying, hey, you shouldn't do that, leave that kid alone, which is amazing when it happens and it's incredible. But it's not, we can't build a society on that if we're not expecting that out of adults too. So I think what has resonated with me so much about the idea of changing a social climate is because in a circumstance where it becomes the norm to be more supportive and it becomes the norm to not bully, by going along with the norm, we're creating that better society. So Dr. Dodge's point really made sense to me. I liked the image that we must be cognizant of the norm we're setting forth as teachers or as leaders from the first day of middle school or even before that. We must be thinking about the kind of society we're creating so that to follow along with that is to create a positive school. And although deviant peer-only groups can be harmful, I think collaboration is really important, and it is important to keep students in the loop. I don't think it can come just from teachers or just from the powers that be, because it does need to come from a grassroots movement as well, and it needs to be something that resonates with students in order for it to become part of the students' norms. And beyond that, I really liked Dr. Juvonen's points about the importance of a heterogeneous social population at a school. And I thought it was so interesting, this idea that we can actually see these detectable differences between the way a minority student or a student in the majority responds to bullying and processes that bullying. Because if, as she was saying, if it is true that in some cases students who are in the minority actually have an easier time processing bullying because it's almost easier to say, oh, well, it's not my fault. It's not that I'm a loser. This person's racist, or this person, there's something going on with them, and that's wrong. And I would love to see us eventually adjusting every student's cognitive framework so we can get to a place where they can cope and justify being bullied as saying, well, that's on them. That's not me. I'm not a loser. That's really their issue. And I think if we can give all students the tools to process it in that way, we can hopefully really reduce risks of depression down the line and hopefully even cutting down on suicides. Also, just the importance of interpersonal connections, as everyone on the panel has been saying. I do think it's so important that students have someone to turn to. A peer, just someone who they're seeing who's smiling at them. I think it's really, really important. Also, what Dr. Espelage said when she cited data that showed that in late middle school and in high school, a lot of anti-bullying programs cease to be effective and can actually be counterproductive, that makes a lot of sense to me, and it's something that is quite worrisome. And I think it really speaks to changing normative behavior. And instead of sort of having these one-off things like doing a poster or an assembly, which is not to say that that in and of itself is bad, but if it's not paired with an overall push towards changing a climate, it ends up coming across as more disingenuous. And I think that one thing that can be really worrisome is that as teenagers, I think we're all a little resistant to being told this is what you should think about this. And I think students are a lot smarter than even sort of just when we're talking about it in the hypothetical, we're given credit for. And I think when students are shown that respect, they will often, and given the tools, given the sort of facts, they will be able to come to those conclusions as well, especially if they're led by people such as yourselves and people such as teachers who are educated and care about the issue. Sort of in my capacity as the president of the Anti-Bullying Leadership Network, I often receive emails and Facebook messages on our page of people talking about their own stories. And there are often parents, there are often students who will reach out and say, I'm bullied, here's my story, what do I do? And one thing that's been a tremendous resource to me is finding the page stopbullying.gov. It's a really, really excellent resource. And it's been really nice to find something that I could really stand behind and say, this is great. Because it's tremendously respectful to students. They have pages targeted towards children, targeted towards teenagers, and it really is the facts. And it's, you're in this state, here's what your legislature says, here's your options, here's who you can call in your neighborhood, and things like that I think are really, really great resources because it's not talking down to them. And I think a lot of students just want information. They want to know what they can do. So I feel like overall it's been sort of a blessing and a curse that bullying has become such a publicized issue recently, so much at the forefront of the American consciousness, because on one hand, it means that so many people care about it, and there are so many well-intentioned people who really want to do something, and I think that's so important because up until 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't an issue that got this much attention and this much legitimacy. But on the other hand, that does mean that there are a lot of ideas out there, and it's harder to parse through them, which is why it's so incredible that there is this push towards data-driven methods and things that'll really work, because there's such an importance overall of evidence-based programs that have been rigorously tested. And it really does seem like we're on the precipice of making a big difference, and I'm so excited to see that. So thank you.